Okay, so in today's class we're going to be looking at basic transformation tools, which will allow us to do moving, rotation and scaling. And in this we like to look at the origin point, which you can see from my cube that is selected here. I have that orange dot down there. That's the origin point. It usually is the center of the object, or is the place where we can transform from. So basically where we scale or rotate from. We used to call it the reference point in Photoshop. In After Effects we called it the anchor point. So it basically determines where we scale from and where we rotate from. Do we show you how to move that origin point, or how to scale away from the origin point? So there are a few things I need to say here. If I hit on G on the keyboard, allows me to grab the cube, and move it around in the world here, Blender's world here. If I left click, I confirm the move. Let me Ctrl Z to show you again. If I hit on G again on the keyboard and then start to move around the cube, if I right click, I'm able to cancel out of the move. If I hit on number pad 1, I can switch to front photographic view here. Let me zoom in a bit, because I want to show you that I can rotate with R on the keyboard and it rotates from the origin point. You can see that orange dot down there that helps me to rotate around a specific origin point. If I hit on R twice, I'm able to use the trackball rotation, which comes in handy as we will study as we go on. If I hit on S to scale, I'm also able to scale from a specific origin point, and you can see it from there. And usually when we scale, rotate, or we grab using G to move around, there are some dimensions that come up here and you can see them. Let me scale. You can see that it gives you units of which we're going to be studying how to convert units in Blender, so that you can do real world size artworks or assets in Blender. So it gives you the specific units of which you're scaling or you're rotating from, or your position coordinates in the world. So usually when we grab, for example, when I hit on G on the keyboard and start grabbing around, if I hold down Shift, I get this slow movement, which gives me a precise transformation while I'm moving the object. Let me right click to cancel. Works the same way for a rotation also. If I want to rotate, hit on Shift, it will rotate in small increments. Okay, so we can move on. I wanted to show you also how to work with the global axis transformations. And in Blender, in the world of Blender, we have 3 dimensions, which include X, Y, and Z. And where they meet there, we have called it world 0, as we had discussed last week. Right now, if I want to scale, for example, I can hit on S and I'm able to scale from the origin point, and I'm scaling on all the axes, on the X, Y, and Z axis. If I wanted to scale but on a specific axis, I just make sure that I accompany my S for scale with the keyboard shortcut for the axis. For example, S and Y will allow me to scale on the Y axis only. S and X will allow me to scale on the X axis. S and Z will allow me to scale on the Z axis. I right click here to cancel out of that transformation. This works the same for the rotation and the transfer on the movement, the position of the cube. If I hit on G on the keyboard and then hit on X, it will move along the X axis. If I hit on Y, I'll constrain the movement to the Y axis. If I hit on Z, I'll constrain the movement or the position of the cube on the Z axis. Works the same for rotation, so I can do that again. If I hit on R to rotate, as of now I'm working on the user perspective view, so it's basically just rotating around the user, whatever view I'm at, so the user perspective. If I hit on R and then hit on X, I'm able to rotate on the X axis. R and then I hit on, sorry for hitting R twice, R and then I hit on Y on the keyboard, I'm able to rotate on the Y axis and also on the Z axis like that. Sometimes you also want to scale on 2 axes. So what you do is, for example, assuming you wanted to scale on the Y, the green one, and the red one, which is the X axis, we just hit on S and then make sure that we hit on Shift Z to lock the Z axis. So I'm able to scale on 2 axes, the Y and the X axis. Works the same. So if I just hit on S again to scale, assuming I wanted to lock Y axis so that I'm just scaling on the X and the Z axis, I just hit on Shift Y, and if I start scaling now, I'm scaling on just the just scaling on the X and the Z axis, locking the Y axis. Scaling works the same also for rotation and position. Okay, let's now look at local axis transformation. We've looked at the global one, where we are transforming it from the world in Blender. Every object in Blender has its own axis, so we usually call it the object axis or the local axis. So what I want to do here, maybe I've used this cube so many times, I just want to delete it for now, so I can delete it with the delete button on the keyboard, or I can just select it, hit on X on the keyboard, and then hit on delete button to delete it. I'll go ahead and hit on Shift A to add a new mesh, because I want to add, let me say, something like a UV sphere. We will not work with this, so it's that simple, just adding that UV sphere on the world in Blender. And then let me use something that has some difference in proportion, so that you can be able to identify the local axis. So I'll go ahead again, let me hit on X on the keyboard, delete this. Let me add something like a cone. Cone works well. So if I have my cone here, you can see that which direction my cone is pointing to. So I want to enable the local axis, so I'll go to the properties. Here's the properties here, you can see it, the object properties on the properties editor. Let me just minimize this, go to the viewport display, and I want to basically see the axis, the local axis. So if I turn this on, I can be able to see the axis at which it's pointing at. As of now, it's similar to the global axis, but when I come here and I like to see this one so that I can be able to see it well, I think I'll switch to X-ray mode. We'll study that as we continue, but if I want to switch to X-ray mode, I just click on Alt Z on the keyboard. Allows me to switch to X-ray mode so that I can see through the objects. We'll look at some of these options as we continue. I want to rotate, so if I rotate right now, you can see the local axis changes depending on the rotation that I have. You can see that. So assuming I wanted to rotate on the X axis, I can do that, and you can see the Z local axis has changed. The global axis still remains the same, so we have Z facing coming like this, as you can see, and as of now the local axis, the Z axis, is facing to this direction. As we had studied before, if I hit on G now on the keyboard and hit on Z to transform on the global axis, and you can see it does that. If I hit on Z again, it basically changes to the local axis. So I have to hit on grab, then double click on the axis that I want to change, the local axis. So for example, if I wanted to scale on the Z axis, but the Z axis for the local axis for the object, so I'll just click on Z again, and I'm able to scale on the Z axis like that. So I hope that will be useful. Let's continue. Let's look at snapping transforms in Blender. So the world in Blender comes with a grid. So the grid is these lines that you can see here. They also exist in the orthographic views, and you can see the grid here, which helps us to visualize where we're placing things in our scene. So I wanted to switch to front orthographic view here, because if I zoom in, you can see I get more lines, so more guides for me to use. If I zoom out, I see these big circles here, and I can use also that to basically position my object in the correct position in the scene. If I hit on G on the keyboard, I usually just hit G and then you transform, and you can see that it doesn't snap to anything. If I hit on G and hold down Control, I'm able to snap to the big boxes that we had. If I let me zoom in so that I can see the small boxes, hit on G again, hold down Control, and I'm able to snap to the small boxes. So the snap depends on the zoom level that you're at. Similarly, we can also switch to perspective view here, and in perspective view, we can also hit on G and then Control to snap. but because we can't zoom in, even if we zoom in, we can't see those small squares. Usually the perspective view, it usually just works with those big squares over there. You can also hit on rotate here, and let me just go back to numpad 1 here, because that's easier to work with. If I hit on R to rotate and then hit on control, you can see now I'm adding increments of 55 from that this panel over here. Rotation is -55. If I move my mouse cursor, you can see that I'm moving on increments of 5. If I hit on shift as I'm holding down control, I'm moving with increments of 1 degree as I continue. Also, scale works the same. So if you scale and then hit on control, it snaps to an increment of 0.1, and you can see that. So in the next lesson, we look at some other basic transformation tools. We'll also go ahead and start on modeling, because that's the biggest part of CGI building. So we'll go ahead and start modeling, learn some simple modeling as we advance the level, and continue on building on the concepts in Blender. See you in the next class, and good luck.